This is CyberSound, your simplified and fundamentals-focused source for all things cybersecurity.
Welcome to CyberSound. I'm your host, Jason Pufahl, joined again fully virtually by Michael Grande, and we have Dylan Marquis. Thanks, Dylan, for joining.
Great to be here.
Yeah. I mean, we've adopted this platform a little bit. I think we'll be back in the studio, no doubt, for some upcoming ones. But this has worked better than we anticipated. So, Alex, thanks for joining. Alex Kretzschmar, head of developer relations for Tailscale, a product that we've fairly recently started to use, really with only the last maybe four or so months, I think, but have been pretty keen on it for a variety of reasons. So before I talk about the why, maybe Alex, if you want to spend a couple minutes on maybe your background and really what Tailscale is, and frankly how you are different in a space that maybe traditionally hasn't felt that different.
Yeah, well, hi. Yes, my name's Alex. I these days live in Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm originally, of course, not from here. Perhaps you could tell, from London originally, or just outside anyway. Been with Tailscale for a couple of years now, and the entire reason I got a job there was because I'm massively into self-hosting. So I like hosting things like a Plex media server at home, a Home Assistant, anything that has a cloud subscription is fair game for me to try and host in my basement. And as such, being a purveyor of self-hosted technologies, connectivity is the bane of my existence. Like, how do I open as few ports in my firewall and allow people access to those services behind the firewall, ideally without transiting through some kind of a VPS or some other kind of like bastion host or something like that. I want as few hops as possible with as much security as possible. So that's why I ended up working at Tailscale a couple of years ago, was because I do a podcast called the Self-Hosted Podcast, and the people at Tailscale at the time were listeners, and I actually sponsored the show, funnily enough. And they said, come make YouTube videos for us about the stuff that you're talking about on the show, and like home labbing and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of how I got my start. But what really drew me to Tailscale as a user, this is sort of speaking before I had my developer relations hat on, was just how darn simple it was to get started. So within a couple of minutes, I can download an app on my phone and on, it could be a Linux server, it could be a Windows computer, it could be a Mac, an Apple TV. Like, Tailscale runs on everything. And I could have these two devices talking to each other as if they were on the same LAN almost anywhere in the world, because Tailscale punches through network address translation, punches through NAT. So typically, you would get an IPv4 address on the public internet, and you'd have to open ports in the firewall to allow connectivity to things behind that. But with Tailscale, it's literally, I set aside a whole weekend to switch a couple of years ago, and I was done in about 15 minutes. And I was like, well, what do I do with the rest of my
And now what do I do with myself? Okay. So I think we started talking about it. Dylan, you can let me know if this was the genesis. But we've been trying to figure out a little bit how to do some basic vulnerability scanning within clients in a way that didn't require that we put maybe software in place and things like that. And I think that was maybe one of the first times or first places that we started to look for creative solutions around this. Is that fair?
Yeah, we started to build something kind of along similar lines. As a matter of fact, I looked up some white papers from Tailscale, and that was how I found out, was trying to build out something custom. And really, we just kind of decided to make the jump because things get more and more complicated as you kind of add components in. And we started looking at Tailscale. We had a conversation, and it was very productive. And we started integrating, and it just opened up a whole new world for us. The software-defined networking and the kinds of options that you have to actually create, define rules and networking within the tailnet and within the inner network on the VPN is just absolutely astounding. And we found more and more uses as kind of we've gone along. So it's really been a great experience.
So do me a favor, hit on one or two. So I know obviously the vulnerability scanning one is the most familiar to me. I met with a client and we talked a little bit about the potential use to move sort of network traffic logs across a variety of different routed boundaries that they had in a simpler way. But what are some creative ways people use this?
I think kind of touching on the vulnerability scanning and sort of what our initial use case was we spin up boxes for internal network penetration tests, kind of on the offensive side. And it was always, we have to kind of clear SSH through on the, border firewall. And it sort of increases attack surface. We saw a lot of clients kind of misconfigure it and open it up more so than they should have. So there's, it was always a conversation, making sure it wasn't actually open and kind of issues there. Sometimes clients can have external IT, and it takes time to kind of get them to open up firewall rules. So it's always kind of what Alex said, in terms of its ability to punch through NAT, the ability to just, set something up, run a script on the box we need to connect to, and all of a sudden it's like it's adjacent to us. It's really fantastic. Also, the ability to set up fine-grained rules. So, staff, it's identity-based. So we can say, staffs with machines with this tag can connect to machines with this tag. So it's very nice and flexible, and it allows us to really get fine-grained and do microsegmentation with our different types of machines that are connected to it.
There are a bunch of other features I could drop in at this point too, along those lines. We have a feature called grants, which by default, Tailscale is a deny all environment. So when you're creating those rules that Dylan was talking about, you can specify in the grants stanza, there's like a JSON file, you can configure all of this stuff in, right down to the protocol level. So you can say all hosts that are tagged with a specific tag can only reach out to this specific subnet router across UDP, for example. So you're just instantly blocking all TCP traffic just by virtue of it not being defined. And that model of being deny all by default is well, it's not zero trust, but it's kind of in that same ballpark of you have to explicitly trust stuff on the tailnet in order to allow it. Because one of the things that people I think misunderstand potentially is that because Tailscale is creating a mesh network between all of your devices, so each device connects directly to each other no matter where it is in the world. You don't need that hub and spoke, so you haven't got that bottleneck that's everything's transiting. And what that means is that some people seem to think that is like a huge security hole. Well, not if you're creating a bunch of grants and a bunch of ACL rules to say, no, the Alex's devices can only talk, Alex can't talk to production unless he changes to a specific user account or something like that. And there's a bunch more stuff I could get into, but that'll do for now, I think.
And actually, to kind of add, Alex, you're talking about stealth hosting, and that's another use case that we've had. We've had services that don't really need to be exposed to the internet, but we need engineers from, anywhere, from multiple different states connecting to, a scanner or to a specific service we're hosting. So it allows us to take it offline and really reduce our attack surface overall. And so it's been really fabulous for that.
Something else that occurs to me as well is that because you're doing direct device-to-device connections, you're not terminating TLS at the load balancer and then re-encrypting it with your own local CA or anything like that. It's literally encrypted end-to-end over the direct WireGuard tunnel that gets created device-to-device. So that's a huge security benefit too.
Is Alex, you touched on some of the unique features, but are there any other primary differentiators between what Tailscale's doing in this venue versus the competition?
Well, we have a very generous free tier. I don't know if that counts, but you can get started with 100 devices and 3 users for free. Obviously, if you are a company's size, number of seats, and you have requirements, we have a sales team. Tailscale.com/sales, I think, is the URL. But essentially, anybody can get started for free. There's no credit card required or anything like that. So if the 3 of you wanted to spin it up at home, you could do so for free. That's really nice. There is, the thing is, I spend a lot of time at events talking to people about answering the question, what is Tailscale? And the trouble is it's a different thing to each of you. So to the 3 of you, I'd have to give completely different answers because you all need different things out of connectivity. Some people need the ability to audit those connections. Some people just need the connections to actually work. And then other people are looking to expose things from inside their network outside using something called Tailscale Funnel as a way to do that too. Like, it really is just different strokes for different folks. And, trying to answer that question is the bane of my existence, to be honest, because it's such a broad spectrum of networking products.
And it seems like, and the customer base has really expanded recently. Is there a primary driver of that?
Well, I think it's, the hockey stick effect as you start to gain traction with, first it was 100 companies and everybody was super happy about that. And then it was 1,000 and then it was 5,000. And I think we just crossed 10,000 active paying customers thank you, with Tailscale. And that's all down to the hard work of the leadership team, making the right hires in engineering and all that kind of corporate stuff, it's just, there's a lot of people doing a lot of stuff and fixing a lot of bugs and just continually. I think Tailscale had the first mover advantage too. Like we pretty much created this networking category that we are now leading. But also I think it's just being willing to listen to all sorts of inputs. A lot of companies, like I used to work for an enterprise Linux company with hats of a certain shade of red, and God love them. They did amazing stuff for the open source community through Fedora and CentOS and things like that. But most of the stuff I ended up working on was all pretty much exclusively customer related, paying customer related stuff. And this isn't to say that Tailscale doesn't do that, because they do, but they also somehow manage to balance those priorities of paying customers against what the free users need and want from the product. And a great example of that is the Apple TV app. So let's say you want to, for some reason, take your Apple TV on holiday with you, and you're in your hotel room and you think, God, I wish I could just access my local TV station from where I am, like just get the news or whatever, and they geo-block you for whatever reason. Like
or they nag you and tell you've moved, right?
Right. I mean, you're in Jamaica. Sorry, you can't watch the subscription you're paying for in North Carolina. Fine. Well, with Tailscale's Apple TV app, we had people asking for that functionality, so we built it and made it, and now you can use an exit node in your house from your Apple TV in Jamaica to pretend you're in North Carolina. It's just little things like that we've seen. We've seen all the rough edges, because a lot of us at Tailscale are those types of nerds too. So we self-serve a lot of the stuff in the beginning, just to round those rough edges off. And as time goes by, eventually just becomes a really, nice product to use.
You've already sold me. Just the fact that I can actually go skiing and watch a recorded basketball game without having to tell me, like, it looked like you've moved. I'm like, I haven't moved. It's the same person.
We try not to lean too much into that kind of geo restriction, circumvention stuff. But the reality is, if you know what you're doing, you can make networks do a lot of fun stuff. But it can be useful for other more legitimate purposes too, like online banking. They can be really funny about where you log in from. So if I want all that traffic when I'm at the coffee shop to appear as if I'm at my house, I can do that in a couple of clicks.
So one thing, well, I guess I have a couple of questions. You said you've just crossed the 10,000, I think, paying subscriber threshold. How long has Tailscale been around?
Ooh, I believe it was founded just before the event in 2019. So,
okay.
Fully remote company. We don't have, I think ostensibly it's registered in Toronto, but I don't believe there's even more than a PO box there. Everybody, including the CEO, is fully remote. From my perspective, it's a fully remote company, and there are many people at Tailscale I've never even met in the real world, and everything just works. Because I think if you end up building a company that is hybrid from the beginning, everybody kind of gets it. But if you try and shoehorn it in later, the culture isn't there, and a lot of the core systems aren't there. Whereas, we're fully remote and always have been. And, for a networking company, that's kind of a nice little notch on the bedpost, so.
And you should, hopefully you have no networking challenges, at least.
Oh, well, I mean, I'd be lying if I said there were zero, but,
So one thing that jumped out to me though is to move into what a business and what do business customers care about. We deal a lot with regulatory compliance, CMMC being one of those. And as you spoke, it just felt like this is probably a really nice solution to some of those more challenging NIST 800-171 objective statements around whitelisting versus blacklisting, and protecting connectivity in between confidential data hosts, things like that. Do you, what can you offer, or what can you sort of shed some light on relative to implementations or use cases like that?
Well, we don't really care where your infrastructure is. So if you have a bunch of on-prem stuff, a bunch of stuff in AWS, a bunch of stuff in Azure, like, to us, it's kind of irrelevant. There might be some stuff you've got to do with hard NAT, to punch through some of the more secure environments that exist in those realms. But from our perspective, we are all about being the easiest way to connect those devices and services together. And as I've mentioned, those devices end up with a direct connection. So you end up with a lot more performance than a lot of standard VPN situations. And because it's an identity aware, like, sort of mesh fabric between all of these devices, we can do some really interesting stuff like inspecting packet headers to determine the origin of those packets. And then it can say, oh, hey, that must have come from Alex's device. I'm going to log you in. And we've got built-in SSO. If you integrate it with OIDC, you can just integrate Tailscale directly with an OpenID Connect server, and you don't need to have an external auth provider even. So there's a lot of cool stuff there. Also, network logs. We talked a little bit about logging earlier. You can actually use Tailscale to stream network logs around the place. So we don't inspect the contents of the packets. As I mentioned, it's end-to-end encrypted. But what we can do is tell you what's flowing where and how much. And, so we're looking at the data flows rather than the data contents, right? If that makes sense.
Okay. How do you feel? How technical? So we're Tailscale partners. So if the answer is, hey, super technical, that's okay with us. But what do you typically see as the level of technical expertise for somebody to utilize Tailscale? Do you really want to lean on somebody like us who has sort of that networking background? Do you see a lot of customers who have an IT person taking advantage of it?
Well, it takes all sorts, really. And you remember when I was talking about how Tailscale has different things to different people. I think this question really speaks to that. So let's just take a really simple example. Let's say I have a basic web service here that's an audiobook server or something, just streaming basic files, right? And I want to give my mother access to that. And she lives in England, right? My mother is, God love her, she's not a technical person, right? She is great at what she does, being a mum, but technical stuff, yeah. So I think to myself, well, what's the easiest way to do this? And the easiest way is for her to download the Tailscale app from the App Store, sign up for an account, which takes a minute and it's completely free. I then share a node from my Tailnet into her Tailnet, and she types in the address I give her, and she's done. I don't have to open any ports. She doesn't even have to really understand what's going on. All she does is toggles the Tailscale button on her phone and then opens the audiobook app, and she's off to the races. And that's it. So I don't think it really gets much easier than that when you're talking about connectivity of stuff that is still running securely behind a firewall, like it's not on the public internet at all, and giving it to the layperson. But if you want to get deep and technical and stuff like that, you can take a look at our documentation and some of the stuff we've got. Like, you can deny connections based on device posture. So let's say you've got a fleet of iOS devices that you control through mobile device management, which version of iOS they're running. You say, right, I only want to allow iOS 18.2.1 to connect to my Tailnet. You can write a rule that's as granular as that. You can say, don't allow, or only allow devices that are not iOS. So you could block all iPhones from TCP connectivity, So it can be really powerful if you need it to be, but it can also be incredibly simple if that's what you need to. Yeah.
Yeah. And just to add a little bit, kind of, as someone that came into the Tailscale, ecosystem and sort of looking at it, and been learning it for the past few months, definitely, without a doubt, there are some technical aspects to it, but it is, for what you're getting, which is microsegmentation and zero trust networking. It's very straightforward, and what you can do is very clear cut and very well thought out. But the documentation is fantastic. As Alex was talking about, the documentation is fantastic. It's one of the things that really drew us to Tailscale initially. And as a company, they've been wonderfully receptive, very collaborative, very interested in feedback. And, it's been a very good experience kind of integrating it into things and finding out the new possibilities for how we can kind of leverage it. But for the end goal of what you're looking for really locking down services very specifically to identities or roles, at a network level, only exposing exactly what's needed for things to run. It's really been fantastic, and again, for the benefit that you're getting, very straightforward and very clear cut.
Alex, anything that you're hoping to cover that we didn't touch on today? Because I think we bounced around a bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would just say go take a look at tailscale.com/KB and have a look at all the cool stuff you can do there. A little plug for myself on YouTube too, youtube.com/tailscale or whatever. You'll find this beautiful face for radio over there. And we cover all sorts of stuff on the YouTube channel, from home lab all the way up to more exciting business cases and stuff like that. We've got some fun stuff. Like there's a guy who's building a drone boat, sailing it around the world using Tailscale for connectivity with Starlink, and he's getting direct connections to his drone boat through NAT traversal that we can do through Starlink. It's just
some pretty creative stuff.
Yeah, it's just a really fun place to work. We get to see all sorts of wacky stuff. Let's put it that way.
I mean, certainly, Dylan and Matt in particular have been really positive about all the interactions they've had. I was looking forward to having you guys on because I know it is, honestly, right. The whole networking space combined with how do I make things secure while keeping things open, it comes up all the time for us, and so I figured it'd be valuable. Certainly, I'd recommend anybody to look at the knowledge base, and that'll give them a sense of places to start. But if there's questions coming out of the podcast, shoot something to to me or to Dylan or to Michael, I'm sure we can get Alex back on. He's got, like he said, he's got a face for radio, so he's ready to go. I have a feeling. And we're always happy to answer questions that are ongoing. So if anybody has one, let us know, and we'll figure out how to deal with it. But Alex, thanks for joining. I appreciate it, and providing us an overview of what you do.
Well, thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.
All right, everybody. Thank you.
We'd love to hear your feedback. Feel free to get in touch at Vancord on LinkedIn. And remember, stay vigilant, stay resilient. This has been CyberSound.